new episode of our webinars on disability inclusion, on how we do it through the business operations strategy. I'm Roberta Martins. I'm dialing in from UNGCO New York. And our main speaker today, it's not me, it's our colleague Heba. So Heba, I'll give you the floor. I'll be managing the chat box. I will be managing the lobby of the meeting and presenting the slides. But over to you.
Thank you so much, Roberta, for all your support. Good morning and good afternoon, colleagues, wherever you are. Happy that you could join in. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and transcribed. We will send in the presentations and the recording after the meeting in the follow-up email. My name is Heba Khalif. If we can go to the next slide, please, Roberta. My name is Heba Khalif. I'm a person with visual impairment. I'm based in Alexandria, Egypt. I have 20 years experience in working with disability inclusion in regional and national and international organizations in Egypt. And today we're going to speak about physical accessibility, and this is very much in line with the Global Accessibility Awareness Month, which is in May. So it is a very good opportunity that we are providing this webinar during this month. And this is an opportunity for each and every one of us to advocate and to practice more inclusive, adopt more inclusive practices in order to provide more inclusion for persons with disabilities. Today, we're going also to have another guest speaker. I hope she could make it for today's presentation. Her name is Arguna Wadoud. She's a Disability Inclusion Officer in WFP, and she will, of course, tell you more about herself in due course. The agenda of the webinar, we're going to discuss physical accessibility definitions from the CRPD and from the UNDIS, with highlighting the different UN instruments on physical accessibility. Then we will follow that by explaining each item of the or part of a building that we should assess for our physical accessibility assessments. Next slide, please. So in the introduction, as you may know, there are 1 billion people with disabilities worldwide, 80 to 90% of which are of working age, and unfortunately are facing higher rates of unemployment. Women with disabilities even face more challenges when it comes to employment when compared to men with disabilities. And it's worth mentioning that disability, according to the CRPD, results from the interaction between physical, mental, or sensory impairments and the barriers that exist in the physical or digital environments. So if we manage to eliminate the barriers, then this will elevate the disability. This will not create any the disabling conditions that we might face. Next slide, please. So this is the definition of the physical accessibility, and physical accessibility is defined as a provision of building or part of a buildings for people regardless of disability, age, gender, to be able to approach, enter, use, egress from, and evacuate a building independently in an equitable and dignified manner and to the greatest extent possible. Next slide, please. So the UN Conventions on the Rights of Persons with the Disabilities, over the CRPD, defines universal design as the design of products or environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. Next slide, please. So there are some UN instruments that are addressing physical accessibility either by providing guidance and guidelines or by providing standards. So the UNDIS is what we call the operationalization of the CRPD. It provides the strategic and the practical operational and reporting framework that could create transformative and concrete changes to promote disability inclusion on the country level. In the next slide, this is the CRPD.
Yes, I'm on the CRPD slide right now.
Yes, this is the CRPD's Article 9, which addresses the concept of physical and digital accessibility, and it urges both public and private entities, state parties, and UN organizations to take all the necessary measures to provide physical accessibility, and that would enable persons with disabilities to using not only have physical accessibility in their offices, but also in their homes, using pathways or crossing roads or taking transportation to reach, enter, or use services and facilities. The issue of the continuous route is very important. So the continuous route means that circulating throughout this route is safe, unrestricted, and possible using wheelchairs or a walking frame or a service dog with no obstacles or barriers blocking the way. Such route must be continuous because it's like the chain. If one link is broken, so all the chain will be compromised. So imagine a person with a disability, let's say with physical disability, having to leave their office and having to leave their home in order to go to their offices. If there is no accessible transportation available, then they wouldn't be able to reach their workplace. So that's why for all the chain links has to be unobstructed and usable by persons with disabilities. So can we go to the slide about UN entities, publications about persons with disabilities, Roberta?
Sure, we are there.
Okay, thank you. All right, so these are some of the standards that are provided by the United Nations different entities in order to promote physical accessibility. So for example, we have TTCP plus FS that adopted the Building Performance Manual for Design Instruction for Buildings and Offices. And this manual is adopted from the International Building Disability International Building Accessibility Code, and we will provide a link of that in the end of our slide. Also, the UNICEF has made a number of publications, for example, making schools accessible to children with disabilities, and the accessibility toolkit, in addition to providing the accessible levels of UNICEF facilities and offices. The ILO, the business operation strategy has also developed practice notes in order to provide guidance for physical accessibility assessments and best practices, along with the physical accessibility practice notes, additional resources, and also the last but not least, the ILO has provided also some toolkits for physical accessibility, such as disability in the workplace, which is a company practice, and the accessibility handbook for ILO offices. Next slide, please. So these are some of the international standards for physical accessibility. So we have the International Standard for Accessible Construction, or the ISO, and we have the other standard A117 for accessible and usable buildings and facilities. And also we have the ADA design standard for accessible design. Next slide, please. So the universal design, there are 7 principles that universal design focuses on, and we will list them here, but we will also discuss each one of them in due course. So these principles are equitable use, flexible in use, simple and intuitive use, perceivable information, and error tolerance of accidental actions, low physical effort, and this is very, very important, as we will explain later, size and space, if seated or standing. Next slide, please. So this video, I don't know if we have the time to watch it, but maybe you can watch it at your own pace when we share with you the slide. This video shows the target groups, which requires physical accessibility measures, as we will explain later on. So in the next slide, we can see that not only persons with disabilities require physical access. Yes?
Sorry. I was trying to change, and I got to the video. I'm so sorry, Hiba. Go ahead.
So are we on the slide about the target groups that require physical accessibility?
Okay, I'm resharing here because
Okay.
it went out.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so these are some of the target groups that require physical accessibility, and these groups include children, adults, and older persons with and without disabilities, a pregnant woman, parents with children or using baby strollers, people carrying heavy equipments, suitcases or grocery items. And this is very important because if you have a building with a ramp at the entrance of a building, this will not only enable a person with physical disability to enter the building, but also will enable a person who is carrying heavy equipment like delivery persons to enter easily. Next slide, please. So these are some tips for conducting successful physical accessibility assessment. But before explaining the tips, I want to highlight the concept of consulting with persons with disabilities and consulting with organizations of persons with disabilities before you start your assessment process, because they are a key stakeholder and a key partner in this assessment process. So first, we have to find out more about the building that we're assessing, its age, its contracting modality, whether it's rented or it's owned, whether it's the condition of the building, whether it's old or new, is there a possibility to remediate and renovate the building or not? Then we have to research and identify relevant regulations for compliance nationally and internationally. Make use of not only of the international treaties like the CRPD, if you are working in a country office that is ratified or that is a signatory of the CRPD, make use of that as a way to reinforce or to push forward for physical accessibility. But also make use of the national domestic laws if the country has such laws. Involve local engineers and architects and urban planners in your plan, and create a physical accessibility task team, including, of course, persons with disabilities and OPDs, and plan for this team to visit the building in advance in order to put some outline of the plan and come up with some recommendations and priorities, and revise and update the existing assessment tools that you are going to use. So make sure that the standard, we mentioned here a couple of standards that you can use, like the TTCP plus FS standard developed by the Common Premises Office. So you can use this standard, for instance, to assess for physical accessibility. Also gather needed materials and equipment and make sure that these materials are available locally, because in some instances, some materials like tactile raised markings for buildings, for example, are not manufactured in all parts of the world. So you might need to export these materials. So make sure to start a sufficient time in advance in order to start early the procurement process. Next slide, please. So the RICO, which is this 4 letter, stands for 4 areas that barriers commonly arise for persons with disabilities in these areas. So I will just say their names, but we will explain them later. So R stands for reach or movement in the outdoor environment and reaching the building. E stands for entering, exiting, and evacuation of buildings. C stands for circulate, which means movement within buildings, and the U stands for use of the individual rooms and facilities within the building. Next slide, please. So first concept is movement in the outdoor environment and outside of the building. This is very, very important. If the outdoor area is obstructed or blocked, persons cannot enter, or if it's inaccessible. Next slide, please. Roberta, just to make sure, the next slide is in the entering.
Entering, yes, I'm following your speech, no worries.
Yeah, okay, because I'm using a Braille device to read. I'm not using my computer because unfortunately screen reader is not working as efficiently as it should. So I'm using another device.
Okay.
Okay. So entering and exiting and evacuating buildings is very important, and very important to ensure that the entrance, including final fire exits to a building, should be easy to find and easy to use by persons, irrespective of their impairment, especially during an emergency evacuation. I was working in one of the organization in Egypt that has, it was a very good and reputable organization, and it was very, very accessible. But unfortunately, the emergency exits were located at the far end of the building, and we have to walk along corridors in order to reach the fire exits. For persons who have physical disability that would enable them to walk for long distances, this presented a real challenge. Next slide, please. So movement within the buildings, we have to make sure that it's easy to find and easy to follow. It's well dimensioned and well lit, and easy to use even during an emergency evacuation by everyone, especially because everyone is moving so fast during emergency evacuation. So we have to ensure the safety of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. So the use of the individual rooms and facilities also have to be very well dimensioned to allow for sufficient space for wheelchair users to move and circulate and use these facilities. Or maybe some person might be relying on an assistant or using a service animal. So we have to make sure that all fixtures and fittings should be appropriately designed and correctly positioned, and they would not cause a safety hazard for persons walking in corridors or doorways. A good lighting, artificial light or natural light, is appropriate, and we have to also make sure that the acoustics should always be considered. As a person with visual impairment, for instance, I rely on acoustics a lot in order to get information about my environment. So, for example, when I'm walking in the corridor, the acoustic and the audio environment the surrounding environment tells me that I'm in a long corridor with walls on both sides. But if I'm in an open space, there are no walls on both sides. So also the sound waves would tell me that I'm in an open space. So if the room has any sound absorbing material, I wouldn't be able to really to detect my environment correctly. Next slide, please. There are some physical accessibility levels created by the BOS Disability Inclusion team and the UNICEF, and they are 3 levels. So we have the moderate level of accessibility, the good level of accessibility, and the high level of accessibility. And each level provide benchmarks for country offices to assess, use as a self-assessment tool and to prioritize their next steps. So for example, in level A accessibility, an accessible parking space, 1 accessible parking space should be available, 1 accessible entrance, 1 accessible toilet, and 1 meeting room, and 1 workstation. But in the high level of accessibility, more than 25% of parking spaces should be accessible, 50% of the toilets should be accessible, and all meeting rooms should be accessible. So you can use these guidelines to assess your country office to see at which level you're currently standing right now, and to prioritize your next steps and identify your benchmarks for your progress.
Hereby, if I just make a quick comment on that. So this is the same level that you see at the BOS platform. When you look at the service at the BOS platform, you see level 1, level 2, and level 3 of accessibility. So this is the reference for the levels that you see at the BOS platform. Thank you, Heber. Over to you again.
Thank you so much, Roberta, for your comment. Okay, next slide, please. So there are 5 areas that should be considered when providing accessibility to accessible parking places. We have to make sure that the drop-off areas are accessible, and they are the distance between the drop-off area and the main entrance shouldn't exceed 50 meters. We have also to make sure that the space in the drop-off area in the parking slot is accommodating for a person to open the car door and for either the driver or the passenger to transfer from the car to the wheelchair. The car parking should also be accessible, as I said, and the floor of the car parking should be slip resistant so as to avoid causing any accidents. Signage is very important. Signs and sign postage should be clearly seen by both drivers and passengers, and they should be signed with the International Sign of Accessibility. There should be a curb ramp from the parking space to an adjacent higher pedestrian area in order to enable persons with physical disabilities to move from the parking space to the main entrance. And this slide presents the different dimensions of width and length of the parking spots, the place that should be, as I said, the place that should be present around the car or vehicle to allow persons with physical disabilities to transfer from the car to the wheelchair. I was visiting a place and this place should have been accessible. There was a ramp, there was a parking space with good dimensions between the car and around the car that would allow persons with wheelchair to maneuver their wheelchair, but the ramp itself was not even, so this could cause a lot of accidents for persons who are using wheelchairs. So make sure that the floor is not only slip resistant, but also is even, so that it wouldn't cause any accidents. Where an on-site parking is not available, be sure to have a list of nearby accessible parkings and make sure that these parkings are sheltered from weather elements like sun or rain and water, because when the floor is wet, it's slippery, and this could cause a lot of accidents. Next slide, please. The slide of the outdoor facilities.
Yeah, just before we move, can I just add another comment here? So yes, when you are using the parking spaces and you see that sometimes you have this area next to a parking reserved parking space, please make sure that you don't block this additional space, because I can tell you from experience, I used to try to drive a lot with a friend with disabilities, and he was on wheelchairs, he was driving his car, but sometimes there was someone parking so close to the to reserve the parking lot that he was not able to open the door and get out of the car and have his wheelchair outside. So it's also for us not using the reserved parking lot slot, but also when we are using the next one, to make sure that we still keep the other one accessible to anyone needing to use it. Thank you, Heba. Over to you.
Thank you, Roberta. This is a very important comment because we can see this in a lot of places. Even if you don't have a parking bay for parking cars, and persons would have to use the street leading to the building in order to drop off a person with a disability or reach the main entrance. We would often, in some places, we would often find that some people are blocking this route to the main entrance of the building. The street vendors, all kinds of blockage that would really prevent access for persons with disabilities. So outdoor facilities, just like benches or signboards, bicycle stands or water supply facilities, playgrounds, all these items should be located in which are located in outdoor facilities, should always allow free passage and the safe use of the site and amenities. There should be a space between these items that would allow persons with disabilities to safely move and reach to the entrance of the building. These items there should be clearly defined routes. It should be planned for pedestrians and shouldn't be used by bicycles. And also bicycle routes should not be used by pedestrians, and they should be clearly defined in order to provide safety for everyone. So, for example, we can use contrasting colors or luminance with the background against which these items are seen. We can be sure that they are visually distinguishable. Providing seats in parking spaces and areas could be very beneficial for persons with disabilities. Some people might have their physical impairment would not enable them to walk for long distances. So be sure to provide seats for them, but always be mindful that these seats should be safe. There should be grab handles along these seats to enable persons to sit or stand using them. Freestanding posts or columns within access routes also should incorporate a band of contrasting color around them or luminance in order to be easily identified. And I can't read this number, from 1500 to 1650 millimeters should these visual markings be available. All right, then the cycle stands should be clearly identifiable, even when they are not in use by persons who are either sitting or standing. This is very important. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the dimension of the accessible ramps in the accessible entrance. And because it has a lot of numbers, we wouldn't be able to say all these numbers. But when we share the presentation, I will be sure to attach a table with all these dimensions in an accessible format. Next slide, please. Doors and door handles are very important because some door handles are not easy to operate by persons with disabilities, especially round door handles. And entrance, even in free fire exits, final free fire exits to a building need also to be easy to locate and safe to and convenient to use with people who have and has limited exposure to rain or wet conditions, because as I said, when doors or door handles are wet, they are not easy to operate. Some doors require a lot of physical effort to open or close, and this is very causes a very another accessibility issue, because some persons have low muscle tones. They are unable to push or pull the doors, and persons who are using wheelchairs might find this difficult as well. So going to the next slide, we'll discuss the reception counter desk, and the reception counter desk have to enable all people to be greeted and directed as required. The reception staff should be accessible for everyone, including persons with disabilities, either sitting or standing. The reception desks should be used by people who are sitting or standing, so they should be at an appropriate height. Other reception furniture should be positioned to allow space for persons who are using wheelchair to maneuver. And in the BOS disability practice note, disability inclusion practice note for physical accessibility, there will be all these items explained with explanation of the appropriate dimensions that you have to use in each of them. Next slide, please. So doorways and corridors are the main horizontal circulation design that enables people to horizontally circulate and move around the building. So it should be designed in a way that is accessible. It should be level on on each floor without any steps, in order to ensure that the building is accessible to all people. And where this difference in levels cannot be avoided, make sure to install ramps or lifts in order to improve accessibility. Next slide, please. As for accessible elevators, there are a number of elements that should be considered when assessing the accessibility of the elevators. First, left locations. Elevators should be located as close as possible to the main entrance of the building, or to the main floor doors, so that they would be easily reached by persons with disabilities. As I said, some people have difficulty walking for a long distance. The left dimensions should also be considered, and as I said, in this document you can find all the dimensions of the elevator, including the door width and the door height and the height of the width of the elevator cabins. And as the third element, which is very important, is the controls. All the controls of the lift should be accessible, and this sub-important point to mention here, they should be on an appropriate height to be used by persons with wheelchair. There should be braille markings and raised markings and color contrast markings to mark the control switches, and also having audio control to the elevator is very important for persons with visual impairments who are not braille readers. And these elevators should be able to reach all parts of the buildings. I used to work in a building in a building that has 12 elevators, and not all the elevators reach all the floors. So it was very hard for me to remember which floors go to which elevators go to which floors. It was very difficult for me to build this mental map of the building and navigate the building independently. Next slide, please. So this escalators and stairs, there are a number of accessibility measures that we have to take into account to ensure the accessibility of the stairs. For instance, landing areas should be free of obstacles and obstructions, including the path of a swinging door or a gate. Also, there is if there is a half landing on 180-degree turn, it should never be less than 1,500 millimeters wide to facilitate carrying a person on a stretcher. There should be a visual and tactile warning system alerting persons with disabilities of the approach and start of each flight of stairs. For instance, a visual warning line with a single strip of 40 to 50 millimeters without a break should be provided on the front edge of the going of each step. And the tactile marking is very important too. So if the stair is in an open area, as I said, the tactile attention pattern may be very beneficial to persons with visual impairment. They should be provided on the landing at the top and bottom of every flight of stairs across the whole width of the stair. The tactile attention pattern would have a depth of between 600 and 900 millimeters, and 300 millimeters to 500 millimeters before the front edge of the first downgoing step. This is very important because if the raised marking is very high, it can cause tripping. And if the raised marking is very low, it's not going to be detected either by the person walking or by his or her white cane. Next slide, please. So the next office indoor environment has some accessibility measures also, physical accessibility measures such as lighting and light switching and control switches. So it is important for different, it's important to use the same mechanism to activate the control switches that functions the same way. So if we have a lot of control switches that have the same function, we have to use the same kind of switch and the same activation mechanism to it. But if this function is different or this control switch is doing a different function, then we have to use a different design. This is very important because sometimes you would go into a building and you would find the light switches, the air condition switches, the fan switches, all using the same design. This is very, very hard for persons with visual impairment, for instance, to detect. So use a similar design for an activation mechanism for similar controls and different mechanism and design for different controls. Next slide, please. Windows are also another element to consider. So each window unit should have a maximum of 60 cms to be a side hang from each opening. And also you have to consider the height of the window so as not to be to enable persons with physical disabilities to use the window such as everyone else, and to minimize the risk of allergies from skin contact with chrome and nickel. These materials should be avoided on the window controls. Next slide, please. So in the accessible toilets slide, according to the international standards, the maximum dimension of an accessible toilet is 1700 by 2200 in width. So in the next few lines, they can explain the recommended accessibility measures for the items inside the toilet room, including the wash basin height and the toilet seat height, the type and the height of the grab bar handles, because sometimes it's not advisable to use the slanted grab bar handles because they are not easy to grasp. So in this slide, you can find all the details about the dimensions of the toilet, accessible toilet. Next slide, please. Kitchens and cafeterias, there should be a minimum of 20% of the tables should be usable by wheelchair users and should have an obstructed lateral access for wheelchairs, for wheelchair users, sufficient maneuvering space between tables and the entrance and the route to the accessible sanitary facilities should also be available. So accessible seating locations for persons using wheelchairs should be available, as we said, in areas of all levels, providing food and beverage services. And the height of any item, like a counter, for instance, or a surface, a shelf inside the cafeteria, or if the cafeteria is a buffet-style cafeteria, should not exceed 915 millimeters to enable persons with disabilities to access them. So another aspect to consider is the space between the aisles. So major aisles should be a minimum of 1065 millimeters in width, and the narrowest aisle should be at least 800 millimeters in width. Acoustics, yes, sorry, yes, so that the cashier, as I said, the cashier and the counters and the display shelves in the cafeteria should not be higher than 915 mm for easy usage. And these counters should be 760 mm in width to enable persons with disabilities to retrieve the food items that they are and transfer food items. Next slide, please. This is also some other dimensions that and accessibility measures that should be provided in the cafeterias. Talking about the knee space that should be provided under the counters, so that would enable persons with using wheelchair to comfortably use these counters. And it is important to ensure that all the crowd control gates can be also used and managed by persons who are sitting on wheelchair. A very important point, floors should not really be slip resistance, and the acoustics and lighting conditions inside the cafeterias should also be considered to enable persons with visual impairments to use the cafeteria. Sometimes when we are considering physical accessibility, we concentrate so much on persons with physical impairments, but persons with hearing impairment or persons with visual impairments also has some requirements in order to physically be able to use the place. Next slide is going to show the kitchenette and the main items included in these slides. The next two slides are going to show the kitchenettes. The main items also to ensure that the cabinets and all the counters are at a height which is usable by persons with disabilities, and make sure that you have a sufficient area in front of the kitchen appliances that would enable persons with disabilities to transfer food items. Also make sure to label the appliances with the braille and with raised tactile markings to be able for persons with to enable persons with visual impairments to use them. So make sure to label all the controls in the kitchen appliances. Make sure to label all the food containers. Make sure to label all the cabinets so that persons with visual impairment would know what's inside. Make sure to use high color contrast and braille labels and braille raised markings. Sometimes you might need to use additional lightings inside the cabinets or in the counters or under the sink to enable persons with some visual limitations to use them. And I want to mention another point here. It is related to the physical accessibility of the place, but it is not directly linked to the standards. Do not or avoid relocating commonly used items from one place to another, because a person with a visual impairment will not be able to use them or to figure out where they are if you move them. Because the way we function is that we build a mental map of the place around us, including all the items we are using. So if you relocate them, you're not able to find them. So the next slide shows some summary of the practical tips that we discussed in order to ensure physical accessibility. Another thing just to add here, make sure that the carpets you're using are firmly fixed to the floor to avoid slipping or to avoid accident. And making sure to distinguish between to use different tactile surfaces to distinguish between different parts of the building. So, for example, if you have your offices carpeted, make sure that your corridors are not. Or if you have your offices made up of wooden floors, make sure your corridors are made of another material for easier access. Always keep your corridors and walkways free of clutter, obstacles, and especially head-level furniture or shelves, because these cannot be detected by a person using a white cane, but it can cause safety hazards. Keep always doorways and staircases and evacuation exits very well lit, and avoid using flashy lights, because flashy lights can trigger seizure reactions to persons who are neurodiverse. So that's all from my side. I apologize for any technical error on my part. As I said, my screen reader is not really functioning very well, and I had to transfer to another device, but let's hope it will continue working better in the next upcoming webinars. Be sure to tune in with us because we have a lot of interesting webinars in the coming days. And I don't know if Zarguna is here, Roberta? Zarguna Wadud?
Let me check the list here. I don't see it here. No, I don't. No, I don't see it.
All right, maybe she couldn't make it because she's actually based in, I think, Nepal or Pakistan, I guess. So maybe because of the time difference, she wasn't able to make it. But that's all from my end today. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to share them.
Yes, thank you, Heba. We do have some comments here on the chat box, but all of them with thank you for the information that you shared. And as usual, we are going to share the presentation and the links. So the presentation also have some all the links to the guidance that Heba was mentioning. And before I see hands or questions here, Heba, maybe it would be good to give them 2 additional points here. First, when you have, as Heba mentioned, if you have a national standard for construction, you can always use it as a reference for the disability accessibility of for the accessibility of the building. This is also something that is recommended for our offices. So, of course, we have the TTCP, and for those who don't know the TTCP, the Task Team on Common Premises and Facilities Management, Facility Services. So they are using the Americans with Disability Act as a reference. But of course, if you have any other international standard or national standard, you can always use them as a reference as well. Another important point that Heba mentioned as well, work with people with disabilities and with organizations of persons with disability when you are doing the accessibility of your building. And I can tell an anecdote from my own experience from my previous office. We did all the refurbish of the building, and we included one accessible restroom in our office. And we were very happy with this because we said, okay, we are moving towards inclusion, accessibility in our building. Until the day the first person with on wheelchairs came to the office. And then we realized there was a very, very small step in front of the restroom, but it was enough for the person not to be able to access it individually, autonomously, which of course was not what we were looking for. We redid it, okay, but we could have avoided it if we had consulted a person with disability or an organization of persons with disability before building the restroom. Heba, I just see compliments to you here on the chat box. Everybody's thanking you for the useful insights and this session. I don't see additional questions here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roberta, and thank you for the very valuable points you mentioned. And if you would allow me just to add a little bit of a comment on that,
Sure.
it is always advisable also to consult persons with diverse disabilities and organizations, OPDs who have persons from diverse disabilities, because not every person with a disability has the same needs. So even two persons with the same impairment, but each of them could have a different requirements, different set of requirements and different needs than the other person. So try to assess your building using as wider audience as you can, using as diverse persons with disabilities as you can, and also be mindful of invisible disabilities and neurodiverse disabilities, because they also require a lot of, or not a lot of, but some accessibility, physical accessibility measures. So be sure also to include them in the physical accessibility assessment that you're doing. Because as I said, sometimes when we do physical accessibility assessment, we think of persons who are using wheelchairs. But all persons with disabilities actually have physical accessibility measures in order to be able to use the buildings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heba. Colleagues, the floor is open. Any questions, any comments, anything that you want to share from your experience? I guess it's Friday, Heba. Everybody is very quiet today.
Yes, everyone is looking for the weekend.
Yeah, I just see thank you notes here for the moment.
All right. So if there are no questions and no comments, okay, so final thing to say, what is the immediate action that you are going to do after the end of this webinar to ensure the physical accessibility of your office? So that's a question of the group. If you want to participate using the microphone, just let us know. Or if you want to write in the chat, what is the immediate action that, since we are already in the Global Awareness Accessibility Month, we would like to walk the talk, as they say, and we can just set to ourselves very small targets. They don't have to be something big. They can be something small, as small as removing clutters from a corridor. So what is the immediate action you're going to do in order to ensure the physical accessibility of your premise?
And you are all allowed to unmute yourself. I just gave you the rights for that. So if anyone wants to use the mic as well, please feel free to do so. Yes, Adia, please.
From Beirut Country Office. So I just want to share our experience with you. We already got in contact with HQ, and we were dealing with the engineer who is in charge of the accessibility of WFP building, and they shared with us the specific measures and what shall be done in our premises, and we made some changes. Not major changes, but because we got an accessible premises from the beginning. They chose a building that is accessible, but even though we made some changes, and it depends on what kind of accessibility we will have in the future. So we will make the needed changes step by step. So at the time being, we recruited a person with disability who is a wheelchair user, and we made sure to create a very accessible environment for this person. So maybe later on, if someone else with different kind of impairment will join us, of course, we will add more changes to the premises based on the need of each person.
Thank you, Abu, for your contribution. And yes, this is what we are looking for to progressive work. We don't need to redo all the buildings at the same time, all the accessibility. That's why we have the levels as well. But yes, looks like a good practice. Heba, we have 2 comments here on the chat. So Luciano is saying that it's very important for us to listen to the real needs of those who experience this every day. And we are all one, and we all need the same opportunities. And we also have Livia saying that I was thinking about my office and I have a question. If there is an emergency and the elevator cannot be used, what can we do to guarantee the safety of a person in a wheelchair, for example?
Very good question. Make sure that your fire exit has a ramp, doesn't have a stair. Or if this wouldn't be possible, sometimes people would use lifts, and these lifts can be used. They can be hooked to the wheelchair, and they could be electrically operated as well. And you can use these lifts in order to help a person who is a wheelchair user to climb up or down a building and reach to safety. So either you make the fire exit with ramps so that persons with wheelchair users who are wheelchair users can climb, or provide the electrical lifts instead of elevators.
Heba, we have Zarguna with us.
Oh, great.
Wanna take the floor, Zarguna, and introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, hello. Hi Roberta, how are you? Hi Hiba.
I'm good. Welcome.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was a bit late.
No problem. If you could introduce yourself, and then if you could explain the challenges that faced you when it comes to physical accessibility when you joined your office, and what are the enablers and opportunities that were provided in order to provide you with physical accessibility to the physical environment within the office. What is yours?
Yeah, thank you. So, hi everyone, this is Zarguna Wadood from Pakistan, and I do work with the World Food Program as a disability inclusion focal person in one of their field offices. And I have joined some 8 months back. And so before getting into the topic, to the main theme of today's talk, I would just like to have a brief brief go through of my background. So I have been working on disability for the past like 9 to 10 years as a consultant, as a trainer with different organizations and different INGOs, UN agencies. And later on, I came across WFP through some project which was being initiated on disability inclusion in Pakistan. And I was taken on board for it. And it was a 3 months project, by the way. And so, like this, later on, when some positions were being advertised, I applied and competed. And so the journey began with them. So, my experience with the WFP till now, if I quote it in one word, would be like it had been amazing. Though I won't say that it was not challenging at all. It has been challenging throughout my life, and this was a new phase of my life. Because I haven't been on a job from 9 to 5, and this was something that I had to step in, and I was given an employment opportunity to work as a regular staff. I couldn't believe it for a while, and I was also very scared, very surprised. There was a mixed platter of feelings that I had because I had this thing in my mind: whether will I be accepted the way I am, the way I have, the way I have been dealing with my disability. whether the WFP office will be that welcoming to take care of my needs or not. So that is very natural. I think this happens with every person with disability when go to some new place, because you always have to start from the scratch. You always have to prove yourself that your disability isn't anything that overcomes your capabilities, your skills, and you also have the ability to give your 100% to that office, to that organization, if you are given that space. And but my all my my worries vanished away when I joined. The ramp was constructed on priority, and I was given a workplace that was fully accessible for me. And after that, the washroom was accessible, but it was very narrow, and that was also taken care of. Like, it was reconstructed, and now I call it a washroom come drawing room because I can easily like just turn around and with all my comfort. So I have been allotted a parking slot where I do park my car, and the main entrance is all accessible. And there is still a lot to come. And with the passage of time, and all our staff that do work on disability, they are all very cooperative. And any time that I have some query in my mind, I have something that stucks my mind that whether this could be done or not, so I just reach out to them, and I have very good understanding with all the staff, and they are very welcoming. And I would say that what this welcoming gesture does is that it boosts your confidence. It makes you feel that yes, you are as worthy as the other staff is of that organization. You are as important as them. This is something very important in every organization, that you have to make people with disabilities feel comfortable, so that they can like discuss their needs. They can ask for reasonable accommodation, because what I think is most of the times we are also scared to tell about our needs, because we feel like we may not be like fired from our job. We may not sound very demanding to your mind, unless your supervision, your management is not that cooperative. You cannot ask for more and more, like more in a sense for your accessible needs. So in that case, I would say I'm very lucky to have such a friendly atmosphere, and such an organization where disability and inclusion is like celebrated as a culture, and everybody is welcomed. And but still, we have to do a lot on disability, obviously. And I missed Hiba's presentation and talk that she was doing today. I'm sure that would have been very fruitful and very productive. So what I would say is that what I have felt is that we need to create more and more employment opportunities for people with disabilities. They have to be advertised separately, because I have seen that there are a lot of advertisements going on, but there is no such advertisement for people with disabilities. They can be hired specifically for the purpose, because they are the one that can who can tell you what are their needs, what they can ask for. Not anybody else can decide on my behalf that what Zarguna would need in an office. If when I join as an employee, I can have a look of the infrastructure, and then I can tell you, yes, this can be done, this policy would work, and this policy needs to be amended. And this thing, like have to be more and more inclusive when it comes to employment opportunities. This is something that I always insist on wherever I'm invited, not only about UN, but the entire system. And about UN, it works very systematically, obviously. So I have to put this thing in here because I know this would be considered on priority. And beside that, my colleagues, if anyone with disability have joined in and if they are hearing me, I would also tell them that you have to be aware of your rights first. Because if you don't know about your rights and you don't know about the policies, about things that exist for you, that have been made for you, you cannot be able to ask. If you will not be able to be vocal about them, and you will not be able to be to make any organization or anyone accountable for it. So this is something very important. You have to be aware of all the rights, of all the policies that exist for us. And the last thing that day also I left, like I ended up with the question was that what we suggest that should any organization work on accessibility first, or rather they should hire employees with disabilities first, because they go hand in hand, right? What if an office is being made and it has been made fully accessible for people with disability, but unfortunately, if a person with a disability joins later on and he or she says that no, this infrastructure doesn't work for him or her. So I think this is something very important that we have to think about, I guess, that whether more and more people with disabilities should be given some platform so that they can talk about their needs and their challenges and how they have overcome them, and how would they see that more betterment could be done in this regard. So yeah, I think that is all from my side, and it's always been a pleasure to be in contact with Hiba. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question, Hiba, here. We have one hand raised, so I'll give the priority to the hand that we have. So Raka, please feel free to unmute yourself. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name.
No, that's absolutely okay. My name is Rachna and I work in India. I'm a disability coordinator for a project where we are mainstreaming disability in the rural livelihood, disability inclusion in rural livelihood. Yeah, my question, I mean, very good presentation, Heba. You've really gone into the details, and recently we were actually doing a training of the disability inclusion facilitators, who are actually the persons with disability themselves, and they are actually going to be talking about inclusion in rural India. I think we also did a practical session on the physical accessibility. I think it would be very good if we can have a rural context to the physical accessibility as well, because many a times it becomes very difficult to actually access government offices. You know, government is are the implementers, they are the policy makers, but if you go to their offices in the rural areas, you are hardly able to access them. So some very easy, low-cost solutions. Making of a ramp takes a lot of time. So what could be the alternate to it? Instead of having a cemented ramp, what could be the ways to make the building accessible, physical accessibility? The other thing which I felt in the entire physical accessibility gamut, we have left behind the persons with speech and hearing impaired inaccessibility. You very well acknowledged actually that most of the time when we are talking about physical accessibility is also focusing more on the persons who are persons with physical impairment or locomotor impairment. So I know I've mixed quite a few issues, but I would look for response, low cost, making spaces accessible, physical accessible with very, very low cost. Making a ramp, what could be the alternative if it is a maybe 6 meter kind of a ramp or a 5 meter ramp which has to be made and which is not to be permanent. Yeah, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the very important questions, and I will address them one by one. First, as for the portable ramp, there are some kinds of portable ramps that are either made of wood that you can just put on the stairs, and these wooden ramps are portable and are locally manufactured, depending on the side of the stairs. But make sure that the slope of the ramp or the inclination of the ramp is adequately relative to the length of these stairs. Or the height of the stairs. So you cannot make them too steep because that would cause persons with wheelchairs not being able to use them. I cannot remember the number of the percentage right now, but I can provide you with my email. You can feel free to reach out to me, and I will send you in writing the inclination of a ramp, what the inclination of the ramp should be relative to the number of stairs or the height of stairs. Another solution is the metal folded ramps that could also be acquired, and these metal ramps you can just stretch them, unfold them, I mean, and put on the stairs, or you can unfold them and store them in a bag, and you can use these two alternatives. Another idea is also to try to change the interview place or the meeting place if even if after you create the ramp the building is inaccessible, so you can pick up another place. I understand that there are a lot of changes when it comes to changing or providing physical accessibility in rural areas, but try to find an open area, for instance, where persons can have the meeting. So that's your first question. As for your second question, for persons with speech and hearing impairment, they can benefit from physical accessibility, for instance, by providing text-to-speech communicational devices, so that if a person has a speech impairment, he or she can just type in the information using text, and the device can transfer that into speech. Or if you want a low-cost solution, to always provide a paper and pen handy so that you can so that the person can write in the information that they need. And for persons with hearing impairment, especially in meetings, if the room has too much echo in it, this could cause an accessibility issue for persons with hearing impairment, because echoey environment does not work well with hearing aids. And with if someone has what we call tinnitus in their ears, they have this constant tinnitus noise in their ears. It's very difficult for them to while they are having this noise is to hear the persons who are speaking to them in an echoey environment. So I hope I answered your question, and please feel free to contact me if you need any more information.
Thank you, Heba. I already shared your email on the chat because some of the colleagues were asking for the previous presentations and all this. So we are sharing all the relevant materials, the presentations, the sessions. So we are uploading to YouTube. We have a little delay at this moment, technical issues, but we are uploading all the presentations as well. So if you missed one of our previous presentations, it's not a problem because you can also see them later. And yes, and don't forget to stay tuned for the coming ones. We do still have webinars happening every week until end of June, if I'm not mistaken. And I just want to share with you, Heba, one additional comment that is in the chat box. It's Zaha Abdullah saying that after this session, I'll highlight the importance of having some facilities to accommodate all people. The definition of disability opened my eyes to different scenarios that may happen, and it's good to be prepared. Thank you for this presentation.
Thank you
So
very
here
much.
we have it.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I really appreciate your nice words and encouragement. And just a small point at the end, be aware, also be mindful of the concept of usability with the concept of accessibility. So, for example, I can have a very good building with an accessible elevator, an accessible washroom, and accessible taps and water taps and everything. But when a person with physical disability would come to use this accessible toilet, there are no running water inside the toilet. The tap isn't working. The soap dispenser isn't working. So make sure that with providing accessibility, be sure that these items are continue to be usable by persons with disabilities. And in the global awareness, accessibility awareness month, make sure to advocate for disability inclusion and be a disability inclusion ambassador within your office, and advocate for more inclusive practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heba. I see that our guest speaker today, she also raised her hand. Zargana, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to share an experience when we were talking about the accessibility issues, that if there is only stairs and there is no ramp available, what can we do? So I just had I think to share that once I was invited as a guest speaker at some seminar, and very high profile people were invited there. And as usual, I was very concerned about accessibility of that venue, and I reconfirmed, I guess 3-4 times with the organizers that whether the venue is accessible for me or not. And they were very confidently, they would answer, yes, ma'am, that's totally accessible for you and you can come. Obviously, you are a guest speaker. We have to take care of all these things. And I went very confidently there, prepared myself for the talk. And when I went there, they said that, see, ma'am, all the place is accessible. But unfortunately, when I had to get onto the stage, that wasn't accessible. And see, these are the things that you have to take care of. It's not about the stairs only, that I can come in very with no problem. You have to be accessible till where I have to sit. And at that day, I had to talk from the down from the downside of the stage, and the other people were all sitting upstairs. And I took a picture of it, and I just uploaded it on social media also. And it was so these kind of experiences never goes out of your mind, when you feel like whether the people that are calling you, whether they are giving you a respect, or rather they are making you feel left behind, or I don't know, it's a mixed kind of a feeling. So these kind of things should be taken care of when you are inviting any person with disability to some place. You have to take care of all the accessibility needs that that person have. So this was an experience that I wanted to share.
Thank you very much, Zargona, because this goes very well in line with what we have been discussing at the beginning of the presentation, when we discussed about the accessible route, that you have to consider the route that the person with a disability takes from the moment they leave their home till the moment they reach their office or their building or their facility that they want to or the event that they want to participate in. Make sure that everything is accounted for. I also have another experience I'd like to share with you. as a person with a visual impairment, I was going to a building, enter a building, a very big building in a very wide space. And wide spaces without handrails or without any guiding tactile floor markings are very difficult for us to navigate. So when first I managed to reach the entrance of a building, I couldn't open the door and I couldn't communicate to any person inside the building. To let them know that I'm waiting outside and I need to have access to access entering the building. So installing intercoms or doorbells beside the main entrance door at an accessible height, maybe from 800 to 900 millimeters, so that it could be operated by a person who is sitting or standing. These doorbells can be wonderful, and these intercoms can be wonderful tools to make sure that the person with a disability is not stuck outside the building. It's not existing in standards, but it is something which is really essential to provide.
Thank you, Eva. Okay, I don't see new hands. I don't see new comments. Any final comments from your side, Eva?
No, I just want very much to thank you, Roberta, for all your support and your assistance in everything relating to these webinars since they started. And also, I want to thank Zarghuna Wadud for her dedication and for her commitment. She showed up in a very late time in her time zone, and she was available and she enlightened us with her valuable experience and life experience and comments. So I just want to thank you, and I want to thank the audience that joined today's webinar, and I hope to see you in future upcoming webinars as well.
All right, thank you, Eva, and upcoming webinars are on the screen, so please join us. It was for us is a pleasure to have more and more colleagues as allies to this very important challenge that we still have at the system, right? Thank you. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.